I'm going to record a video whilst playing Classic Series multiplayer. Happy New Year. It's 2 a.m. for me on New Year's Day. But this video is mainly me telling a story, so I apologise if there's any bad driving. I'm probably going to forget I'm driving at one point. And I've looked already at what cars there are in this. It's all the cars up to B class. So if you have a B class car, you start with a B class car. There's absolutely no point in using the cars beneath it. But anyway, I won't talk about the cars much. I'm going to try and tell my story. And yeah, it's New Year's Day. I had finally got to sleep yesterday about 10 p.m. after the 3 days of being unable to sleep because of the bin truck noise pollution. And it's not just because of the truck noise, it's because of knowing that it's going to happen again and again and again and again. And it's just soul destroying at seeing your home demolished in the way that it's being. But anyway, I get to sleep after taking a diazepam that the doctor prescribes me to calm down after inevitable events like this will happen every single day of my life living in Hammersmith and Fulham. And then I get woken by the inevitable midnight bash, and I had no idea what it was. And I've been to New Year's Eve in the Philippines where there's like 12 hours of dynamite being put into walls and exploded, and 300 people losing their limbs a year, and that was pretty terrifying. But tonight was somehow more terrifying, and maybe it's just because I'm fragile. It was 360-degree explosions, and everyone's singing ABBA from rooftops. And a part of me wanted them to fall off the rooftop. I thought, should I get my camera out just in case they fall off the rooftop? Because it'd be quite amusing. I'm so evil inside sometimes when people have woken me up. But anyway, there's a point to this. And that guy's right on my tail. He's going to steal the finish from me. There's a point to this story. I've said before, I hate labels, but I've got behavioural disorders, and you can have a behavioural disorder without it being diagnosed, and it's still just as significant. And I have several diagnosed, and I wish I had never had them diagnosed, because it's like a stain on your character. You think if you ever lose your temper outside and then someone sees on your medical record that you've got this, you're now not able to act the same as you would before. You could somehow get committed and told you're crazy, and there's nothing you can do to fight back against that. So it's the worst thing I ever did, I think, getting actually diagnosed with behavioural disorders. And there's so many of them, and again, I hate the labels, but there's so many of them. It's not just one, and the main one that I accept is Avoidant Personality Disorder, and has been with me since I was 3 or 4 years old, and I had no idea what it was until I was 34. I think I saw a documentary on RT News called I can't remember what it's called, but it was about a group of people called hikikomori in Japan. And hikikomori are people that haven't left their house for 6 months and still live with their mum and just play computer games. And I'm not like that, but there was something I connected to with these people, and they're all Japanese. You kind of have to be Japanese to be a hikikomori. It's part of the cultural definition. But there's other disorders that are similar to that in Western culture, etc. And I start looking stuff up to see. And you get the normal ones of seasonal affective disorder and just social anxiety disorder, and those they connect with me, but they're not. But then when I read about avoidant personality disorder, it was like reading my autobiography in the shortest possible way. It was like someone's actually written down my exact life in four lines. And then what's the humour of my disorder is they say, what's the treatment for avoidant personality? Well, these people tend to avoid getting treatments, and no one's ever cured. It's not something you cure. It's not something you can ever really cure, because the people that have it, I had to spin because he was in shock though. You can't cure it because the, the people like me that have it avoid everything at all possible costs, and that includes going to a doctor or going to hospital if anything happens. Oh. So how do I get back on track with this story? My childhood. I was beaten every day of my childhood by my teachers, by my parents. I was punched in the face by my teachers. I was beaten with the slipper. I was beaten with belts. I was beaten with wooden spoons. I was shouted at for every thought I had. I was laughed at for everything I ever said I wanted to do. I was excluded from nearly every class in school because they didn't want to listen to me because I actually knew quite a lot and I was smart. And so I'd ask questions that the teachers couldn't answer and they'd chuck me out of the class. Now, when I was 4 years old, I think I did something. I probably wet myself at school, like when I'm 4 years old. And George Orwell wrote about wetting himself in a book called Coffee and Cigarettes, I think. In Down and Out in London and Paris. And George Orwell grew up in the same area as I did, and then he moved to the same area in London. I feel like I'm following him in his shadow. And when he wrote about this as an adult, writing about his childhood and his parents beating him for wetting the bed, he used to sit at his bed each night and make a prayer to God and say, please God, don't let me wet the bed. And then the next morning he'd wake up and the anxiety he suffered had just meant he'd wet the bed again, and then his parents beat him up. And this is what made him believe he was born evil. And that's what created the mind that then wrote Animal Farm in 1984 and created this paranoia about the society that we live in. But anyway, I'm 4 years old and I've been sent, I might have been 3, no, I was 4, yeah, and I've been sent to the headmaster for what I think was wetting myself. I'm making up that it was for wetting myself, but it just seems like the most probable thing. Maybe I was just being a smart ass to a teacher, but it feels at that point in my life, at 4 years old, early on in that class, I remember it happened a couple of times, and I think they thought the solution was to send me to the headmaster and shout at me. And so the headmaster tells me he needs to discipline me and he needs to ask my mum first. So he calls up my mother and goes, your kid's been a prat, we need to sort him out. Is it all right if I discipline him? She goes, yes. And then I get the slipper for whatever I'd done. And then he sort of congratulates you for taking the beating and explains to you that if you bring this up at home with your parents, they'll obviously beat you again because they'll be reminded about what a brat you've been. And that no one likes a whining little child. So we'll just move on with it, and then that's sorted. I was beaten at this school for the next 8 years, mainly by my history teacher. He would punch me in the face if anyone in the class misbehaved. It wasn't just if I did something. And my mother had made me sit in the front of the class because I was supposedly partially deaf in my left ear, so I had to sit at the front left of the class, so the teacher was on my right and I could hear them. And this teacher, I won't name any of the teachers or my school, but this teacher would punch me in the face or slap you and then punch you. If you tried to avoid the punch, he'd grab your head and slam it in the desk. If you went any further than that, he'd kick your desk away and your chair and go psycho. And I know at first he was hitting me because I was misbehaving, but later he was just hitting me because someone else was misbehaving. Like he'd shout at someone at the back of the class and then just strike me. Maybe I would laugh at him shouting at someone else and he'd strike me, but I'd just basically get striked every history class. And I know now why it carried on is because I never complained about it. But why did I never complain about it? Because at 4, my headmaster had programmed me that that he had asked my mother permission to do this. My parents had given permission to the school for them to beat me, and the school had made me believe if I went home and moaned about it, then my parents would beat me as well, and that you would then suffer a more serious punishment because they made this belief that formal punishments were worse than a beating. So you could either get a beating and just accept it, but if you complain about the beating, then we can have a review and decide what your punishment should be and get your parents involved. And then you're like, oh Jesus Christ, I don't want to do that. Yeah, well, just it was all right. I only got punched a few times, fine. And not once in my 9 years at this school did I ever complain to anybody that I was being punched all the time by these teachers. And all the other kids in the class were laughing every time I got punched. Sorry, I need to... I'm angry. And all my life... Wait. All my life, I thought this was normal. I thought this was like everyone's life. And I'd say the odd thing every now and then and realise that maybe not everyone's beaten as much as me. And when I got to uni, I thought I'd meet other people that had been through the same sort of stuff, because I thought there's always one that I can't say, but then still, no, people didn't even believe me. Then I was 34, and I thought it built my character. It was good for me. I couldn't see the harm it had done to my character or how it had changed me. I just thought it was a perfectly acceptable way to be brought up. And I even, when I was 20, I became a teacher, and I thought that was how I was meant to bring up children. I didn't ever hit anyone, but I verbally abused a child, and then he threatened to stab me. And I was so surprised because I thought this is how my teachers would have dealt with him. They would have come in, whispered in his ear what a loser he is, just to break him down, to stop him misbehaving in the way that he was. This was the school I taught at was one that Stephen Lawrence went to. It was an absolutely crazy place to teach. Anyway, let's get back on track. When I was 34, I'm then at a Christmas dinner with my family, and I'm thinking I've never told my mum about this time when I got the slipper, and I think it's quite an amusing story. At that point in my life, at 34, I think it's a funny story to tell my family at the Christmas table about when I was 4 and I got beaten by the headmaster with the slipper for the first time. And I start telling the story, and I can see in my, I read a lot in people's eyes. I can see a lot in people's eyes, 1,000 times what they say in their words, I can read in their eyes. And I'm telling this story, and I see my mother's eyes, and they're kind of blank. And there's no guilt that I was beaten at school all the time. That's too difficult for her. And the fact that my parents beat me as well, that it's confusing. But when I told this story and I saw her eyes, something immediately became apparent, and it was so embarrassing. And it actually gave me a breakdown. I lost my job, I lost my girlfriend, and what I realised at that moment is when my headmaster made that phone call when I was 4 years old and called her and asked permission to give me the slipper, and that phone call governed the rest of my life at that school. It changed my relationship with my parents. It did everything. And when I saw her face, I instantly knew that he had faked the phone call. So he had pretended in front of me as 4 years old. He had pretended to call my mother and pretended she was on the other end of the phone. And in 30 years, I never once thought of that variable. And then I broke, because how did someone trick me for 30 years? I have an IQ of like 176. And this guy tricked me for 30 years. Other disorders I have: PTSD, OCD. I've been deported from America. I've been raided by the police, handcuffed naked to my bedroom chair. I had a car accident when I was 4 years old, where a car drives straight into the side of the vehicle I'm in, right into the door I'm in when I'm 4, at full speed. I still see that all the time. I can't. And then people tell me they've got PTSD from, like, someone last week told me he's got PTSD because he fell out the bed once. I was like, PTSD to me is so much more complex. It's a life of trauma, not just not just one thing that happened. Sorry, I'm losing myself. I was going to write a book one day. When I was at boarding school, one of our kitchen staff became an arsonist and started trying to burn down the buildings in the school. Started with the athletics pavilions and different things and teachers' cars, and that made the school really paranoid, and we had to do fire drills all the time, and they would, like, at 3 a.m. they would set a fire alarm off, and I still remember at 13 years old them setting the fire alarm off at 3 a.m. and for like 15 minutes me just getting out of bed like a robot and dressing myself normally, completely unable to understand what was happening because this noise was just completely overwhelming me. And the PTSD, like the most significant event about noise and sleeping was being raided by the police at 5 o'clock in the morning as a stunt they were doing for Bravo television, when they didn't even have a warrant that allowed them to break my door down. They still decided to break the door down because it looked good for television. It utterly insulting. I'm gonna, for the first time ever, just play tokens to skip because I've got so many and I've got to continue my thoughts. I have no idea what I was just talking about. Like the avoidant personality disorder was a disorder that happens through early childhood and sort of rejection from peer, being a bit oversensitive. It makes you aware of risk, but I also would have been classified as autistic had I been born 20 years later and we did that stuff. In the 80s, I was just called a difficult child and beaten for that. OCD for me developed after the police went through all my stuff, ripped up my carpets, went through my computer, went through my boxes, looked at everything. You know, it made you paranoid. It made you understand that whatever's in your house, someone's going to go through it and analyze what it means. Like, I had a list of phone numbers that were the most important phone numbers to me in my life, i.e. the people that I didn't want to lose their number in case my phone died. So I'd written them down on a piece of paper, and they took that to court and said it was a list of my customers for drug dealing. I was not a drug dealer. There was nothing, I hadn't done anything wrong, but a list of names with phone numbers on was suddenly a customer list for a drug dealer in court. all of this got thrown out, but I still had to spend 3 months terrified about everything because I'm going to court for something I don't understand. These things have made me sensitive to noise. I'm very aware of my surroundings. I'm not excessively paranoid, I'm just acutely aware of risk. And there's a lot of risk when you're in a city. There's people are always about to get run over, people are always about to have a fight, someone's always about to rob something, someone's always about to do something else. And my problem with going outside isn't that I'm scared of everything, I'm more worried about how much I'm going to get involved with. So whenever something happens in front of me, I have to get involved, and I don't understand that part of my character, but I just have to get involved, because sometimes I have to hold myself back and not go out, because otherwise too much will happen. Oh, I should have left the shop open. Is he going to come back now? Because that was a... Right, I've let a little much out just now. The story's a lot longer than that. I'm not even sure what I was planning on saying when I started making this video. But I had to at least record my version of what happened with that headmaster for myself later, because it goes through my head so much. It never did until that point that I realised he had made up the phone call, and then it just consumed my mind. I spent ages wanting him to go to hell. Like, I'm an atheist, but I believe in heaven and hell. It's a relativity thing. Your life has two end points, but from your perspective, as you approach that final end point, because you'll never be on the other side of it, from your perspective, that last moment will be infinite. So whatever your feelings are when you die, that's how you will feel forever. I.e., so you'll have an eternity of whatever your last moment is, you will feel that for eternity. So if you're scared and you're regretful and you're angry, that's hell, you know. If you're blissfully unaware and happy like most plebeian sheep on this planet, then you go to heaven. And I'm angry that he's probably going to heaven because he's blissfully unaware how much damage. He didn't just do this to me, he did this to a lot of children. And he would be like 85 years old now. I don't even know if he's still alive. I want to knock on his door and make him scared, let him know that I'm there thinking about him, what he did. And the shame of it, when I was 18, I met him and laughed and joked with him and was friends with him, and I still didn't understand what he had done to me and what he'd stolen from my life in terms of my relationship with my family. The fact that I actually thought they were, when my history teacher's punching me in the face, it was no different to I thought my mother was, because she had signed it off. And that guy's gonna hit me. Well done, Luigi. I could hear you coming, but I was too busy talking. Thought you'd let me off because I'm a bit fragile, but no, this is Asphalt. Let's KD each other. The character in the movie split. Like not the baddie, the main character. Baddie doesn't exist in my world. He's the main character, and he's killing these people and he wants to get rid of these people. But the person he lets go is someone that's covered in scars. And the point he's making is that the people who haven't been through pain. I can't even make this point myself. It's complex, but there's an offensiveness to people that have been through a lot of pain. There's an offensiveness to how blissfully the people that haven't been through pain live, and how they still inflict pain on others without knowing and carry on living in their bliss. And people say, they think if I've said that I don't care what COVID does to the world in terms of, and have been called selfish. There's 7.8 billion people on this planet. I'm incredibly empathetic. I feel emotions very strongly. I can feel other people's emotions the moment I look at them. Okay, I don't have the capacity to feel sorrow for every single person on this planet. And the fact that we have a news like TV that broadcasts every bad thing into our house doesn't mean we should have to know all that stuff. It's not healthy for you to consume yourself with that amount of grief and sorrow all the time. You go back to the question, if a tree falls in the woods, did it really happen? If someone dies and I do not know them and I don't know about it, doesn't matter, you know? There are too many people for that to matter every time. And none of them have cared about me, and that guy's very close behind me, and I'm going to get KD'd again. Not paying enough attention. When I was 4 years old, like a tiny little simple thing that's so funny to my family. Yeah, I got KD'd. I tried to spin. That's why you see me go like that. So funny to my family. Like I was 4 years old. They go, what? Like I suddenly realised what I want to be when I'm older, and I go, I want to be a cooker. And yes, that's funny because I didn't know the word. It's chef or cook, but it makes sense. You cook. A person is a cooker. But they didn't just correct my English, they just laughed at me for the next hour, like the loudest laugh possible in a public restaurant, keep joking about, oh, he wants to be a cooker, he wants to be a cooker. Then it went on for about the next 4 years being laughed at for wanting to be a cooker. And I still didn't know, I still actually just assumed they were laughing at me because I had chosen a low-class job. You know, they still, after 4 years of them laughing at me, I didn't know it was because I'd got the word wrong. I thought they were laughing at me because I wasn't allowed to be a chef, because that's for poor people. It's so confusing when every decision in your life you're laughed at for, and you don't even know why, and then you reevaluate and change it, and then you're laughed at for changing it. And they're like, oh, well, why didn't you become a chef? If you wanted to become a chef, why didn't you become a chef? Oh. I'll call my mother, go, Mum, I'm going to move house. She goes, oh, you can't do that. You've got to work out where you're going to go next. The next week, I call her up and go, there's a problem in my house. And she goes, oh, well, I told you to move house, and it's your fault you haven't moved. I'm like, Jesus Christ. I'm like, what? Like, and this was me, like, imagine, now I'm an adult, I can see what they're doing to me at 4, and at 5, and at 6. How confused must I have been with parents like this, that kept saying one thing, then telling me off for not doing the opposite. It was like, oh my God. Oh, that's scary. The game. It's getting really scary. We're in a bit of a... That was really KD vulnerability bit then. And that guy, I can't get too close to him because he could just 360 and take me out, so I've got to wait for my moment. It's just there. Oh, he was doing shockwave as well though, good boy. Ah. I don't know how that KD happened. He could have done a Actually, no, I'll say it. I don't know how that KD happened. It felt like a connection, but he had a good one. Oh. I want more fuel in my Hurricane. Good luck, guys. I'm madder than you.